By the time the light shifted and the heat began to thin, the male no longer moved with the ground's rhythm. He lay on his side where the grass flattened beneath his weight, chest lifting in shallow intervals that barely stirred the dust along his ribs. The mane that once caught wind now held grit and burrs, and flies hovered closer than caution usually allowed. Nothing about the moment announced itself. No struggle, no sound. Only a stillness that did not belong. Around him, the plain continued as it always had. Insects rasped. Distant hooves pressed a slow pattern into the earth. A breeze combed through seed heads and passed over his body without answer. Lions were made of motion even in rest, tails flicking, ears adjusting, breath steady and deep. This one remained unchanged, eyes half-lidded, jaw slack. The weight of his head sunk into the soil as if it had simply been set down and forgotten. Those who watched did not rush. Years in this landscape taught patience before action. The difference between sleep and collapse learned through long hours of observation. Yet the silence around him widened. Vultures circled farther out than usual, uncertain. Hyenas did not approach. The space felt held, as though the land itself waited for the next small sign that never came. A vehicle slowed at a distance, stopping well short of the lion's reach. Boots touched ground carefully. The air carried the scent of dust and dry grass, and beneath it, the sour edge of exhaustion. From where they stood, they could see the tremor in his flank, each breath a measured effort, each pause stretching slightly longer than the last. His tail lay still. One ear twitched once, then settled. Closer now but never hurried, they traced the story written on his body. The old scars along his shoulder, pale and smooth, spoke of seasons survived. The ribs pressed faintly against the skin suggested days without enough food or water. His tongue showed briefly as his mouth opened, dry and thick. When a fly touched the corner of his eye, there was no reflexive blink. "It's okay, boy," one voice said, barely louder than the wind, not meant to be heard by anyone else. The lion's breathing faltered and resumed. A low sound escaped him, not a call, not a warning, just air passing through a tired chest. Muscles along his leg tightened and released, a reflex without direction. The smell of him had changed, sharp and stale, the body conserving what little it could. They knelt at a respectful distance, movements deliberate, hands kept low. A canteen tilted, a thin stream darkening the soil near his mouth, close enough for scent to carry. He did not lift his head. His eyes shifted once, unfocused, then drifted back toward the glare of the sky. Trust was not offered, it was simply not resisted. Minutes passed without shape. Flies gathered, were waved away, returned. The sun leaned west, light softening into gold, shadows lengthening around the lion's outline. In the far distance, a herd moved like a single breath, dust rising and falling behind them. As evening approached, the land cooled, and with it came a fragile quiet, broken only by the slow, uneven rise and fall of a chest that had not yet decided to stop. Time did not correct what was wrong. Instead, it revealed it piece by piece, the way heat draws cracks through drying earth. As the hours eased forward, the lion's body began to give up its small disguises. A darkened patch along his flank came into clearer view where the fur lay uneven, pressed flat as if something beneath it had shifted out of place. Each breath pulled that side inward a fraction too slowly, then released it with a faint, wet sound that did not belong to a healthy chest. When he tried to adjust his position, the effort showed immediately. The muscles in his hind legs quivered before obeying, a tremor that traveled down to the paws and settled there, unresolved. His claws scraped weakly at the soil, carving shallow lines that ended almost as soon as they began. The movement cost him more than it should have. He stopped, sides heaving, breath now audible and short, uneven pulls that lifted dust into the air and let it fall back onto his mane. Approach changed nothing. The distance that would normally trigger a rise, a turn, a show of warning power passed without reaction. When they stepped closer, slow and open, the lion's head lifted only slightly. His eyes focused at last, not sharp but aware. A sound gathered in his chest and came out as a low rumble, broken and thin, more habit than threat. It faded quickly, leaving him exposed in the quiet that followed. "That's all he's got," someone murmured, not in judgment, only observation. The lion did not retreat. He did not gather himself or attempt to stand. His tail gave a single weak flick and fell still again. Flies traced the edge of his ears and settled along the dampness near his mouth. One foreleg stretched forward, then drew back an inch, the joint stiff, uncertain. Pain traveled through him in visible ways now, tightening his jaw, flattening his ears, pulling his body inward as if trying to protect what remained. Around him, the land responded differently than before. The invisible boundary that animals respect began to loosen. A jackal appeared at a distance, watched, then moved on. Birds crept closer, pecking at the ground, alert but unafraid. The silence no longer felt accidental. It felt heavy, something settled into place. Hands hovered near equipment, but nothing moved quickly. There was no urgency in posture, only focus. Eyes tracked the rise and fall of his chest, the way his breathing stuttered when he shifted, the faint shudder that ran through him and stopped. A touch of water was offered again, dampening the dust near his muzzle. This time his tongue moved, slow and tentative, catching the edge of moisture before slipping back. It was enough to change the sound of his breath, but not its depth. The injury spoke without words. Whether from a failed hunt, a blow unseen, or the long narrowing of resources, the damage had reached a point where concealment was no longer possible. His body held itself together out of habit alone. Strength had drained quietly, leaving only endurance behind, stretched thin. As afternoon tipped toward evening, the light softened the hard lines of his form, but it could not hide what was happening. Each small detail accumulated, undeniable now. The lion remained where he was, not because he chose to stay, but because leaving had slipped beyond him. The problem lay in the open with him, breathing shallowly, waiting without resistance as the day moved on. The man closed the distance the way the land itself seemed to move, without angles, without insistence. His steps were placed with care, each one paused long enough to read what the lion offered in return. Not challenge, not retreat. Only a watchful stillness, broken by breath that rasped too close to the surface. The man stopped when the lion's ears flattened, waited until they eased again. Progress was measured in these small permissions, granted and withdrawn without warning. The lion's body spoke clearly now. His head remained lifted just enough to see, but the weight of it trembled at the neck. One foreleg lay bent at an awkward angle, paw turned inward, muscles along the shoulder tight and unyielding. When the man shifted his stance, the lion answered with a low sound, thinner than before, vibrating more in effort than in intent. It faded quickly, leaving only the sound of breathing behind it. "I hear you," the man said quietly, not moving closer, not moving away. There was no illusion of understanding between them, only attention. The man lowered himself to one knee, keeping his outline small. His hands stayed visible, resting against his legs. The wind carried his scent forward, sweat and dust and something human, unfamiliar but not sudden. The lion's nostrils flared once, then stilled. His eyes followed the man's shape without tracking detail, as if holding the idea of him rather than the threat. Time stretched and softened around them. The sun slid lower, its heat easing just enough to loosen the air. Flies were brushed away gently, not from the lion directly, but from the space beside him, giving him room without intrusion. When the man edged closer again, it was no more than a body length, then another pause. The lion did not recoil. His tail tip moved once, then settled. Breath shuddered in, lingered, and released. The ground between them became a shared space, fragile and easily broken. The man reached out slowly, not to touch, but to place a small container of water within reach. The movement drew the lion's attention sharply. His ears pinned back, jaw tightening as a warning gathered and failed to rise. The man froze mid-motion, arms suspended until the tension eased from the lion's body again. Only then did he complete the gesture, setting the water down and withdrawing his hand. The lion's tongue emerged cautiously, thick and pale, touching the damp edge of the container. He drank in shallow laps, stopping often, breath interrupting each attempt. His body trembled with the effort, but he continued until fatigue forced him still again. The man remained silent, breathing slow, eyes fixed not on the lion's face but on the rise and fall of his chest. Nothing was rushed. Help did not arrive as an answer, only as a presence that stayed within the limits allowed. Equipment was prepared behind him with the same restraint, movements muted, sounds softened by cloth and patience. Every action waited for the lion's response before continuing. When pain rippled through the animal's flank, visible in the tightening of skin and muscle, the man waited it out, letting the wave pass without adding to it. Between them, something held. Not trust, not comfort. Something thinner, more temporary. Permission to remain. Permission to exist near one another without demand. The lion lay where he was, no longer alone in his struggle, and the man stayed grounded beside him as the light thinned and the first cool breath of evening passed across the grass. The air shifted before anything could be seen. A change in rhythm, a distant stirring that altered the way the plain seemed to hold itself. The man felt it first, a subtle tightening in the quiet, and then shapes began to separate from the horizon. low and steady, moving with purpose rather than haste. The pride had turned back. They did not rush. They approached as lions do when certainty has not yet formed, bodies loose, heads low, attention spread wide. A female paused, scenting the air, her tail lifting briefly before falling still. Another circled farther out, keeping distance, eyes fixed on the male lying in the grass. Their presence changed the space immediately, not with noise or threat, but with weight. The land seemed to lean toward them. The injured lion responded before anyone else could move. His breathing hitched, then deepened with effort. Muscles along his flank tightened, shuddered, and held. His head lifted higher than it had before, neck trembling under the strain. A sound emerged from him, low and rough, stronger than anything he had offered since collapsing. It was not a call for help. It was a statement of being there. The man did not interfere. He shifted back slowly, widening the space, lowering his presence to nothing more than a witness. The pride advanced another few steps, then stopped, reading what stood before them. The male's body gathered itself in fragments, front legs bracing first, claws digging into soil for purchase. The effort was uneven, almost clumsy, but it continued. With a long, unsteady pull, he brought his chest off the ground. His hindquarters lagged behind, shaking visibly but did not give out. Dust fell from his mane in small cascades as he adjusted, breath coming hard now, audible, each inhale dragged from deep within him. He stood there for a moment, suspended between collapse and balance, then swayed and corrected himself. One of the females stepped closer, slow and deliberate. She did not touch him at first. She stood parallel, close enough for their shoulders to nearly align, her presence firm and grounding. Another lion approached from the opposite side, creating a quiet enclosure around him, not trapping, simply holding space. The male leaned subtly into that formation, weight redistributed, supported without ceremony. "Easy," the man whispered, though it was unclear who the word was for. The male lion's legs trembled again, but they held. His tail lifted slightly, a small arc of movement that signaled awareness rather than strength. He took one careful step forward, then another, each movement negotiated through pain and instinct. The pride adjusted with him, matching his pace, body shifting to shield and steady without contact that might unbalance him. The moment did not feel triumphant. It felt necessary. Survival expressed not as escape, but as continuation. The man remained still, hands lowered, eyes following the slow procession as it angled away from him. The lions did not look back. Their focus narrowed to the path ahead, to the shared work of moving together while one of them could still move at all. As distance grew, sound returned to the land. Insects resumed their rhythm. A breeze passed through the grass, lifting seed heads and laying them down again. The sun slipped lower, warming the edges of the world in amber light. The pride became shapes again, then shadows, then part of the plain itself. When they were gone, the space they left behind did not feel empty. It felt finished, at least for now. The man stood alone as evening settled, the last light stretching long across the ground. Somewhere beyond sight, bodies moved together through tall grass, slow but aligned, carrying something forward that would outlast the moment, held not in strength alone but in staying. They moved without looking back, the pride shaping itself around the injured male as naturally as water finding a channel. His steps were careful, measured by what his body would allow rather than what instinct demanded. Each placement of his paws carried hesitation but also direction. The grass parted at their knees and closed again behind them, tall stems brushing his sides, catching the last light and turning it into muted gold. He favored the injured flank, weight shifting unevenly with each stride. Now and then his legs trembled, the effort passing through him in visible waves, but he did not stop. The others adjusted around him, slowing when he slowed, pausing when he paused. A female walked just ahead, glancing back only with the angle of her head, not her eyes, checking alignment without breaking forward motion. Another remained slightly behind, close enough that her presence pressed against the air at his back. Distance softened the sound of their movement. Paw steps faded into grass, breath into wind. The land accepted them without comment, swallowing their shapes until only the tops of manes and ears remained visible, then nothing at all. Where they disappeared, the grass swayed longer than the rest, disturbed by passage, then gradually stilled. The man did not follow. He stayed where he was, feet planted in the same dust, body held in the posture of someone who knows when not to cross a boundary. His hands lowered slowly to his sides. The quiet returned in layers, settling over him without urgency. What had needed doing was finished, not because it had been resolved but because it had been released. He stood for a long time after they were gone, listening to the familiar sounds reassemble themselves. The distant call of a bird. The hum of insects reclaiming the air. Somewhere far off, hooves pressed rhythm into the earth again. Nothing in the landscape marked what had just passed through it. No sign remained but flattened grass and faint tracks already softening at the edges. The man exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding. There was no sense of triumph in it, no relief sharp enough to name. Only a quiet acknowledgement that something fragile had been allowed to continue on its own terms. He gathered his equipment without haste, movements unchanged from how they had always been. The work demanded the same calm now as it had before. Before leaving, he paused once more, eyes drawn back to the place where the lions had vanished. "Go on," he said softly, the words barely carrying beyond himself. The sun leaned toward the horizon, lowering its weight into the day. Light spilled across the grass in long, thinning bands, warming dust and stone, catching on seed heads that glowed briefly before dimming. A breeze moved through, bending the plain in a slow, unified gesture, as if the land itself were breathing out. The man turned away at last and walked back the way he had come, steps steady, pace unremarkable. Behind him, evening gathered, and somewhere beyond sight, a pride moved together through tall grass, unsteady but forward, their shapes dissolving into shadow as the light quietly let them go.